So welcome to the meeting of the Historic and Design Advisory Committee. I'm Emily Heyman. I'm senior planner and staff person for the committee. We have Emily Morton and John Marcotte on the committee. In the room, applicants Chapin Caner, Tony Lamb, Michelle Carr, and our friend Bailey. The first application on tonight's agenda is Tony, HP 2502. This is the Williston Federated Church, requesting a certificate of appropriateness for second floor windows, replacing second floor windows, constructing a ground level porch on the rear facade, and replacing a second level stairwell on the rear facade at 8195 Williston Road, known as the Mace House in the National Register Historic District of the Village Zoning District. So what is proposed, on the backside of the house, the existing stairwell does not have a cover. Code requires that it have a, awning or cover over it. I'm gonna, before we do the windows, I'm gonna scroll down to those addition elements. So this existing deck, it used to have an ADA ramp, it's a small deck. They're proposing a covered porch. That will be a little bit wider, and extend off the back of that existing dwelling unit. So there's 2 units in the building, that's the entrance for the first floor unit. The second floor unit has an existing stairwell that needs to be repaired. They're proposing to shift the doorway, so you'll notice on that second level, that blue line is where the new doorway is gonna move. This will get the doorway trim out of the gable freezeboard area. And allow for that cover that's proposed to not encroach on the decorative elements. You might recall a couple of years ago, there was an application on the neighboring property, the Church Fellowship Hall, to add a second level stairwell that's covered. It's proposed to match that existing one, and here's a photo showing what's on the existing Fellowship Hall and what they propose to replicate next door. Are there any questions on the porches before we go to windows?
The doorway, we're still fine tuning that because we don't want to interfere with the trim. You know, we got the cute trim. But moving the door is problematic on the inside because of gas lines and things, so the goal is to have it. Primarily not infringe on the trim that comes out the side, and then we'll have to build around it somehow, we haven't. That's where we are.
Thanks for being considerate of that.
Well, no, I mean, it's a cute building.
Yeah.
But maintaining all those little gimcracks can be a pain in the pocketbook.
At least the door swings in, that helps some.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep, so. On to the windows, so many years ago, not that many years ago, but a few years ago, there was an after the fact permit for window replacement. What this application is proposing to do is replace the windows on the second level of the home. The windows are vinyl clad. They will have that simulated divided light pattern on the exterior side, so the 6/6. Scroll to the proposal. So their proposal is the premium double hung windows, which does allow for the grills to be on the exterior of the glass as well as the simulated divided light feature in between the glass. Some of the windows will be casement windows where they'll open out. And Tony did confirm that the window contractor can put in a piece to simulate the divided light appearance or the double hung appearance. This is similar to what was done at the orthodontics office, where on the second floor, some of those windows, they look like double hung. True divided light windows, they're actually simulated divided light and a casement window. So the recommendation on the certificate of appropriateness is that these recommendations comply, or these changes comply as proposed. and the windows may be replaced with the proposed material.
Is that just for egress that's
Yes.
happening? Yeah,
It's egress, we're using the casement,
yeah,
but the windows have to be replaced because they're single pane. I mean,
yeah, right.
No one's, might as well leave them open.
Right, yeah. Do you have any?
So you said these were vinyl clad, right? So they're basically a wood window with a vinyl cladding on the outside, or is the outside totally vinyl?
I don't, so these are replacement windows, so that the frame is a wood frame that's already there, these are just,
Like inserts?
like inserts.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that part.
Okay, and there's, I dodged your question, so yeah, if you appreciate how carefully I dodged it, but I was trying to look to see, I mean, we have a, cutaway that shows, can't tell from this, I don't think they're wood.
Oh. Vinyl clad usually.
It says wood inside,
Right.
yeah, I can't tell from this, I don't.
I guess my only concern is that we've not really allowed vinyl
Mhm.
windows. We've allowed fiberglass as a replacement for wood. So we have a precedent. I don't think we want to change a precedent. That's why I'm just trying to understand exactly what we have coming here.
The vinyl don't last as long, so we've been trying to,
Yes, no,
yeah,
I
going for longevity.
yeah, I don't have, let me just look at the other, well, it says clad, so it's, I mean, clad suggests.
But it's wood under, right?
Yeah, that was how I would read it, but it just wasn't clear when I was looking through the specs either. And just the word vinyl just
Yeah, no, no,
concerns
no.
me because of the precedent that we have and that we don't want to, I believe, change a precedent.
Mhm.
There's definitely advantages to the fiberglass.
Mhm.
The disadvantages, they usually cost a little bit more, so. But operationally and longevity,
Right,
it's a very good thing.
we did cost over years for one of the projects, and it wasn't like over the duration that. That window wouldn't need to be replaced again. I don't think long term it was that different, but certainly upfront it's different.
Yeah,
cost.
that's the problem with the windows, you gotta pay for them up front.
Yeah,
You can't
exactly.
pay for
No, we're
them
not-
over the life of the
so we're
window.
Exactly. But the heating goes down.
So it is important to note that these are not original
Yes.
windows, these are already
Changed,
a changed replacement.
so we're,
We were allowed through HDAC 10-15 years ago to put vinyl clad on the second story at the back of the house.
Mhm.
Just, we were having splashing off of, more roof and,
I think I remember that.
yeah, and so so I don't know about precedent, but we were allowed on second story on the back of the house to put vinyl clad. I don't even think fiberglass was an option then, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's pretty new. Fiberglass is pretty new.
It's relatively new. I'm bringing it up just because we need to have the discussion.
Right.
I'm not making a decision, but the
Right.
discussion needs to be had.
It's certainly something, if we can't ascertain it from this. We should put as like an asterisk on our recommendation, I would say.
what would the asterisk mean?
To not, just to clarify what material, cause we would
On the
prefer,
inside.
yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Vinyl on the outside, wood on the inside, or fiberglass, or not a full vinyl window insert. Because this is the whole, Tony, it's on the whole second floor, is that correct?
yes,
Yes.
all the windows on the second floor
Right.
are,
Which is like 8 or something,
6, I think.
6,
The other thing is the wood on the inside gives you some insulation value
Yeah.
of the framing part of the window.
right.
Yeah, and it just gives you some rigidity too, that
These,
Agreed.
the better word for it, yes, very good.
I never use the word, whenever I do any of this work, I never use the word vinyl, I always use man-made or something.
Right.
But,
Um,
my,
So if it's important caveat, our bylaw cares about the exterior appearance, not
Yes.
necessarily the inside, so I think. I'm trying to run a word search on the document so we can see if it does say wood. Most likely it's wood on the inside. I do have the conditions of approval drafted. All windows may be replaced with the proposed material, so right now they're proposing the second floor.
Mhm.
If and when they do the first floor, they could use the same ones as the second floor and not have to go through the review process. That way we can ensure that whatever happens, eventually the first floor will match the second floor.
So we're not potentially shooting ourselves in the foot if we say yes, because these are replacement windows.
Right, not necessarily, because the replacement windows right now, they have the grills between the glass and have that very flat appearance.
Mhm.
The ones that are proposed will improve the appearance. They have that beefier appearance from the outside and the
The
exterior
actual
dimensions.
dimension, yeah.
So you get that muntin, you get that divided light pattern with that actual dimension. And then it's not gonna be great because the second floor will look a little bit different now, but we'll give them the approval that when they're able to replace the windows on the first
Mhm.
floor, then they'll all match.
Yeah, that would
We
be,
like that.
So the house next door won't come in a year and say, well, they got vinyl windows, how come I can't have
Yeah.
vinyl windows? I'm just playing the devil's
No,
advocate.
no, no,
here.
that's-
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make trouble, that's not the point.
I think. Complies as proposed is true. I think neither of us have an issue with the porches or the
Oh, no,
replacement.
no, and
I-
the concept of the windows, I have.
Oh,
no
for
problem
sure.
with,
Yeah.
Absolutely,
We're very happy to hear that.
It's just
I-
literally the material.
Right.
For
right.
those windows is my only question.
I-
picture a minute, that's it.
Which again, I feel like we can sort of. Include that in the recommendation. Or ask for further clarification before they go in front of the DRB.
Color variation, Sierra Pacific offers a variety of wood
Yeah.
species produced in combinations of solid and veneer wrapped wood parts and have a variety of grain patterns. Wood characteristics vary due to species of wood. Okay, that's just that there's not some changes.
I mean, vinyl moves a lot more than fiberglass
Okay, here we
does.
go, premium double hung, the ultimate final window. You'll discover that actually mimics the details of a premium wood window. Don't know if it's wood on the
Yeah, it says the look of.
contoured glazing bead mimics the look of wood glazing bead.
Vinyl expands and contracts a lot more than if it was over wood. Wood does not move very much. And over the years, things start to separate
Mm,
and create leaks and things like this. So
Yeah. How can I help? Be nice,
Emily's Googling.
Huh?
Yeah, I'm doing some Googling.
okay,
Let's see, all wood. Double hung.
That looks the same. I'm not sure if that's.
I think it is all vinyl because like the way this one tilts out,
Mhm.
that's definitely. I think these are the double hung that open by sliding or tilting
Mm.
for easier cleaning.
mhm.
So I think it is all a vinyl material.
the other thing that makes it complicated is that the composition of vinyl changes. You follow me, when they first, we did vinyl siding.
Mm.
The vinyl siding that was available when they first did it is very different from the vinyl siding that's available now.
Right.
What I can't tell, but having said that, it doesn't help very much in terms of figuring out what,
The material.
yeah.
Yeah.
As long as we're not shooting ourselves in the foot so that the
Right.
next person coming in
Mhm.
wants to tear out a wood window and put in a vinyl window, because we've been very stubborn, if you will, on not
Mhm.
allowing
Right.
vinyl windows to replace a wood window,
Mhm.
but we have allowed either new wood or fiberglass.
Mhm.
Mhm,
So we're in, I guess, a little bit of a gray area,
Mhm.
and I
mhm.
just wanna make sure we understand that. And
Note that
we
for
can
future.
sit here in the future and say, well, Emily said it was okay.
Yeah, I think the key difference here and where the precedent would carry forward is these are. We're
Not the
already
historic.
not historic,
Mhm.
they're already a replacement material. Fiberglass would be great, but we're already going from an improvement of. What the true hope is that the grill pattern is maintained on the outside,
Mhm.
so it's a step in the right direction
Mhm.
versus if this was an original window. There would be more scrutiny on that replacement
Mhm.
and probably a push for fiberglass, a more durable. Material. For an original to a replacement, but a replacement to a replacement, I think there's a little more flexibility here.
Especially when it's a replacement to a replacement that's gonna appear more accurate to
Mhm.
the original windows, yeah.
Yeah, the fiberglass has better profiles and stuff, just
Mhm.
because you can do that with fiberglass. You can't do quite the same with
Mhm.
vinyl. Um, I am comfortable with it as long as we've had the discussion and feel that we are not. Creating a future problem
It's on the
for
record.
us to have to deal with.
Mhm.
You could make a recommendation to the DRB that fiberglass would be preferred. But recognize that it's a replacement window and this is an improvement.
I think a little more. Detail as to why we're saying yes is valuable. Cause the DRB likes to know why we make our decisions, I would imagine.
Right.
And to John's point, not having them say, wait a minute, you don't usually recommend to approve these, just kind of explaining our thought process a little bit.
Okay, so the hack to DRB recommendation, fiberglass is preferred. Replacement.
Or other materials
Yeah,
of
yes.
fiberglass, we approved. How much, how actually do this now? I noticed Emily provided me with a copy of the orthodontist thing, and they were aluminum clad, I think.
Mhm.
So it is,
Aluminum clad, I think, is more expensive, for one thing.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of experience with windows over the years,
Yeah.
aluminum clad. Looks very nice up front, you pay a premium. They tend to actually separate because they're,
yeah,
the aluminum expands and contracts a lot,
yeah,
just like vinyl. And whatever is behind them doesn't.
Mhm.
And if it's totally aluminum, they still tend to pull apart because they're not molded,
yeah.
they're formed and then
Mhm.
basically screwed together in corners and
Mhm.
things. So caulkings and stuff tend to, I mean, there's,
It's hard to compare the different materials
Right.
because they each
It
have
is.
different properties and there's
Right.
advantage of this one, disadvantage of, and I think.
yeah,
The fiberglass just has stuck as sort of the best
Okay.
cost for result.
Okay,
Which is why we kind of are attached to it a little bit more.
The aluminum also conduct heat, so they're not as good in cedar.
yeah.
just trying to give you all the information that you sort of
Yeah.
have for what it's worth.
Both acknowledge that, it's a,
But everything else looks good. Thank you
thank
for
you.
being mindful of the trim on
Well, we're trying
Queen
to.
Anne style and everything.
We never, I was thinking about this, that we don't see the building. Because when you go into when you go to the church,
Mhm.
you always come in on North Wilson Road and you see the back of the Mace House, but you never see the front.
Mhm.
And so. Most of us have no sense of what's going on with it, and
Right.
it's clear we need to pay more attention to it. Cause it is it has a potential to be a pretty little building.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you've done a good job of maintaining it over the years too.
Well, it's,
The, the
Yeah.
church has
we've
put
got
time and
that.
effort and funds into that. Consistently.
Yeah,
If I may offer a little bit of thought on your porches and stuff, the pressure treated wood. pressure treated wood nowadays is not what it used to be. It is severely compromised,
Yes,
and there's different grades of it. There's one grade which is strictly recommended for ground contact
Yeah.
or within 6 or 12 inches of
Yeah.
ground. You wanna make very sure you don't use just conventional pressure treated and have it too close to the ground.
yeah,
Nowadays, because the pressure treating doesn't go through the wood as much as it used to, you wanna make sure anything that gets cut is sealed in the field
Mm,
also.
yeah,
And then any horizontal, like stringers and things like this, they recommend a self-sealing tape
yeah,
be put on top of them before you actually screw down whatever you're using
yeah.
for deck boards. And then, of course, where you attach it to the house, make sure you have proper drainage and flashing.
mm,
I just point that out because I just reading an article recently where decks were literally failing in less than 10 years
Wow.
structurally because of rot, which you wouldn't think you would have, and
mhm.
That's, that, yes. We had trouble with our own deck for
Mm.
that very reason, and, making sure it doesn't.
as long as whoever you're using to do it is just aware of the currents.
Mm.
Because this is changing rather quickly in the field, and there's a lot of people say, "Oh, I've always built them this way." Well, that doesn't really work necessarily,
Mm.
but just a heads up in case that's
Appreciate it.
helpful.
Appreciate it. No, I'll talk to my guy. Make sure
Mm.
we don't wanna be doing this again
10 years.
in.
Mhm. So finally got it to open. This is the replacement aluminum clad window at the orthodontics office 7921. This was before the shutter was put back on, but they do have the shutter,
Mhm.
faux shutter mounts. All right, so this will go to the Development Review Board on November 26th. And I'll add that in recommendation in
Thank you.
that fiberglass is preferred, but there's some flexibility
Mhm.
for replacing an existing replacement window
Yes.
Yeah.
With a less desirable material.
with a less desirable material.
We had maces in our house back in the 30s and 40s, I believe, and about the history of our house.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh,
Mace came right up.
There was still some in our church, and
Yeah, what somebody in the Mace family brought us some pictures of somebody before a wedding in 1946 or something. In the front of yard of our house.
with this building, and if you see pictures of the church back in the 18 whatever, you can see right next to it, it's very prominent. And so it's important that it stays there historically.
Yes.
We're good? Thank
We're
you very
good.
much.
Thanks, Tony. Do you want
Thank
to
you.
CA?
Good luck.
Next Wednesday, is it?
Tuesday at 7 PM. I'll send a reminder email.
Okay, great, thank you.
Take care, Tony.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Then what year did your house get moved back from?
We're told 1957.
Okay, so recently-ish in the history of how long it's been
Yes.
Yeah. in there. 50. Sorry, side note. I wasn't
Oh,
gonna
I'm
say-
infatuated with all of it.
Yeah.
We had Sam Ford do the full,
Okay.
like, everything.
Oh,
back
that's
to the
awesome.
Beginning of our house.
That's awesome.
It's
And
pretty
she
cool.
found there were abolitionist
wow.
meetings in the 1850s in that house.
Cool.
But, and we hadn't realized, apparently it was the main farmhouse on the street, there's all the land behind
Right.
was associated with that house, including the 2 orchards
Hmm.
and so forth.
Very cool. Very cool.
Alrighty, so the next application is HB 2503. Chapin Caner and Patricia Carr, and we have Michelle Carr in the room this evening. A certificate of appropriateness to replace an existing deck with a screen porch at 77 to 79 Penny Lane. The Caner House in the National Register Historic District of the Village Zoning District.
And by the way, 79 Penny Lane no longer exists in anybody's database.
Okay,
That was the back entrance when we rented the upstairs out. It's no longer an entrance and E911 and all the people were notified. So I don't know if
that's
that's,
probably a copy paste on our end.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
it's not inaccurate, but 79 doesn't really exist.
Mhm. Alrighty, so this is a proposal to replace an existing deck with a screened-in porch. I'll go to the. So the proposed elevation for the screened-in porch would match, the siding reveal. The existing roof on the main house is in the process of being changed over from shingles
Mhm.
to standing seam. So this porch would match the standing seam. That was an application that was reviewed a couple months or
Months
years
ago.
ago. This deck is on the southeastern side of the home, so it's not visible from Williston Road.
It's the red.
Mhm.
The footprint will be getting a little bit smaller. It's currently an octagon shaped deck. The porch will be a traditional rectangle. So the footprint will be changed, I think slightly reduced.
Very slightly reduced. Um, because this has cutaway sides,
Mhm.
it'll be more of a rectangle, it'll come out slightly more than that, but not as much as the stairs. do.
Mhm.
And it will be slightly less, it'll be the same on this side, and slightly less on the south side. And it will attach to the wall, that's a 1957 closed-in porch.
Okay,
It'll attach that porch the same exact dimensions.
Okay.
You can see when we did this, we did that thinking we might make a little screened-in entryway for like an airlock, and we never did. And we couldn't figure out how to make more of a roof at the time,
Mhm.
or we might have made it more of a roof on it, because that's 1995, that little porch
okay,
roof and the deck are 1995.
So the proposed materials, the roof is metal to match the current updates. The windows are not applicable, they'll be screens, the door is a screen door with a wood frame. And it's a post and beam style construction with a sonotube concrete foundation. There is 2.5 inch reveal clapboard siding proposed for the lower kick wall. So the recommendation, is that this complies as proposed. Do you have any questions or thoughts?
I do.
Does the screening go right down to the floor of the deck, or do you have like a meeting rail or something and?
That's the kick wall?
Yeah, they'll be about 2.5 feet along the bottom that will be solid.
Okay,
And that we're gonna side with the clapboard so that it looks
okay,
like the same as the house.
good,
Is that this?
Yeah,
okay.
So
Yep.
it's this solid siding and then this. or is this-
no, he just didn't draw it. So the one above. It was still up in the air whether we were gonna put a door in that section or not. So when he took the door out, he just didn't, so there will be one door. And we'll have, yeah, so it'll be solid basically around like the bottom 2.5 feet.
I only ask because some people run screen all the way down and then everybody's foot runs into it and it gets all mucked up,
That's
so.
Oh, it's
exactly.
called the kick
No.
wall, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Chairs, have a 6-year-old.
yeah.
Yep. Mhm.
So the view that we just saw with the little man standing there, that would have been the other side,
Yes, that would be
Yeah, the
from the
picture.
south looking north.
which is
whereas-
that old screen and porch, it's now a room.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think it looks good, the roof
This
will
is
just,
straight on from the east.
right. The roof matches the, the gable. That it currently is and the rest of the house. So it'll sort of look like a extension then of,
The whole.
yeah, yeah,
When we. There was 9-inch reveal clapboard on this whole wall when we got the house and we replaced it with 2.5-inch reveal clapboard. But we put in these windows and then there's actually a little roof over these windows because we had to replace them twice
oh,
for rot. So they now are vinyl clad wood with a little roof over them. So there's been, even since we've been there, we've been changing things for better or worse.
Mhm.
And to me,
generally better, I would
this
say.
doesn't, that's right, mostly better.
yeah.
But this doesn't have the same pitch, but it has the same look and same trim.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
I don't see any issues.
yeah, I'm 2 thumbs up.
Alrighty, so this will also be going to the DRB next Tuesday on November 26th.
And you didn't show the photograph, aerial photograph from the, that shows the entire location But you all probably know where it is. But when we talk about it being on the backside. If we can go, there's another one yet.
There we
There.
go.
Oh, yeah.
So it's on the backside there, and this is Penny Lane, which is our
Mhm.
driveway, and this is Route 2. So you can see where,
Yeah,
where it is in terms of visibility.
generally invisible.
You could not see it, except you might be able to catch a glimpse from the interstate, maybe.
Maybe in the winter.
It's almost a shame it's so invisible, because it's a nice looking place.
Yeah, it's gonna look great, yeah.
Well, you can look up the driveway and see the turret and stuff. so,
Mhm, yeah.
and,
Yeah,
So it does contribute to the historic district, but this
Oh, for sure.
screen porch on the backside is pretty much
mhm.
invisible. Okay,
Looks good to us. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you, guys.
I'm gonna go home and come back.
I'll go home and come
Oh,
back.
right,
See you in a
because you
bit.
have, yeah.
I have plans
Round
for
two.
7.
Nice to meet you, Bailey.
Say hi, Emily.
Billy, do you know that Emily's on the fire trucks that go through
It's
the
true.
town during the 4th of July parades?
I always wave at you.
Hey, you can finish it one.
Good to see you, Michelle.
Thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you for
No problem.
continuing to steward your property so nicely.
But it's getting easier now that we have other generations.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Alrighty, so the next order of business is the village bylaw amendment. It's,
It's giggling.
Can I ask one clarification, because I read that stuff this afternoon?
uh-huh,
It's amendments to the current village bylaw, not the new village bylaw, not the new village plan.
the village master plan?
Yeah,
No, not amending the village master plan,
Yeah.
because that's a comp plan, town plan thing.
okay.
Yeah.
So I got them confused. I was thinking that we are gonna, okay.
Yeah.
Great. All look good to me.
So this is included in a package with other Be Home Act amendments. We're gonna ignore most of that because it's kind of boring. So in terms of the village bylaw, there's changes that have been incorporated into other parts of the bylaw. So a lot of the parking stuff and parking lot design got way simplified. In the village zoning district. The parking lot. Standards are very flexible, with the DRB giving a deference to. Making it feasible on the site and doing the minimum amount of parking that's required. And more parking can be designated for compact spaces than elsewhere in town. The
Like
pedestrian.
compact car spaces is how I
Yeah,
understood that.
compact car
Okay, yeah.
spaces, yeah, so little cars, not big cars. Maintenance, there's a lot of discussion about how solid waste containers are
Mhm.
placed and screened, including sound mitigation. So moved that into chapter 16 for maintenance. If the town wanted to expand that into other zoning districts in the future, it's more adaptable that way.
Mhm.
And then it just tried to group like things with the other zoning district chapters. Density, the current density is preempted and PB Home Act is making more changes to density. But the proposal here remains the same, that parcels less than 2 acres, there's no units per acre, it's like form-based code. You're either modifying an existing structure, and chapter 46 already has those standards
Mhm.
that if you are modifying an existing structure, you can't do weird unit layouts, that's already in our bylaw. If your parcel is larger than 2 acres, then it's limited to 6 per acre.
And I think, if I remember correctly, from when we went through this before,
Mm-hmm.
there's very few properties in the village that are over 2 acres.
Very few,
Yeah.
yes, and the ones that are constrained.
Yeah, right,
and
they're
have
like the long
wetlands,
skinny or wetlands,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
Where they might be able to get some density and then cluster it outside of wetlands area, but you're not gonna be able to develop in a wetland area.
Right.
Mhm.
I know a lot about wetlands. area.
Yeah.
Yes,
you
you're
know.
learning quite a bit. So landscaping, this is one that got, some of it still lives in the village, and we'll go over that. The parking lot landscaping, the triggers are lower, so elsewhere in town, a rank of 24 spaces or a parking lot of 24 spaces. In the village, it's 12 spaces, so the thresholds are a little bit higher in the village. Outdoor lighting, so form-based code, we limit the color code, so
Mhm.
not too orange, not too blue, we're adopting that town-wide. And then also in the village requiring that parking lot lighting shall be limited to pedestrian bollards located along the perimeter or pedestrian way, except for partially exempted uses, so things like town hall, the church, the school, they have bigger parking lots, they're gonna have tall pole mounted lights, and they can still have those, but thinking about commercial and adaptive reuse,
Mm.
they can only have those bollards, and that's gonna push people towards smaller parking lots where your perimeter, your pedestrian area is lighted, it's gonna have less of an impact on the neighbors.
Mhm.
Signs, the signage rules are pulled into the signage chapter, none of that has changed. The preferences for white posts, either single or double, simple design. The one thing to note is that the lighting, instead of being just fully shielded, we allow for angled sideways,
Mhm.
so the village inn. Their lighting is still sideways, I figured it's not really hurting everybody if that light's shining towards the property, make it okay. Now to the village zoning district, and I'm gonna pull up that document. And I'm actually going to work backwards a little bit.
Oh, that's what I love to do.
Or I'm gonna jump to the meaty part. So standards for material design and modifications. And maybe what I might do is actually jump to the little permit threshold quick guide. Yeah. Okay, so this is language that is already in the bylaw. But what is a certificate of appropriateness? It's the DRB putting their National Park Service hat and saying, yep, this change is okay. And it's required for anything in the National Register Historic District. And then contributing structures outside of that district, so we're getting rid of that weird additional review area. Contributing and non-contributing, I'll go over in a moment as
Yeah, I was gonna
well.
say that, we talked a lot about that, so.
Yeah.
I'm interested to. know
Yeah.
more.
Some things are exempt from a certificate of appropriateness, so interior modifications, site plan changes, at-grade patios, fences, these are things that you can do any property in town. It won't need a certificate of appropriateness, and some things will require an administrative permit. So the permit thresholds are the same as everywhere else in town. Some things require certificate of appropriateness, so the workflow is. Have you received a determination of contributing structure status within the last 3 years? If you haven't, you should get one. If you do, then the next question is, are you in that National Register district? If you are, unless what you're doing is specifically exempted, you need that certificate of appropriateness. And it's either on its own, an administrative permit or a DP. If you're not in the National Register Historic District, then it depends on if you have a contributing
Mhm.
structure or not. So if you don't have a contributing structure, you're like everywhere else in town. You can get a standard permit. Administrative permits, the zoning administrator may seek advice of the HAC or DRB, so maybe you're outside the review area. You're non-contributing structure, but you're gonna do a full house replacement, maybe there might be advisory comment. Or if you're doing something that requires a discretionary permit, then there will be design advice built into that review process. But it's not getting that certificate of appropriateness. Back to that list of some things do and some things don't need that certificate of appropriateness. So jumping back over to the bylaw. So the intent of the standards for materials, designs, and modifications is to preserve the character of individual structures that contribute to the overall character of the National Register Historic District and the Village Zoning District. These standards apply to all contributing structures throughout the Village Zoning District, as well as both contributing and non-contributing in the National Register District. And there's flexibility for rear facing facades. So for example, what Chapin is
Mhm.
doing, you can't see it from Williston Road. The DRB and the zoning administrator can apply this with a little bit more flexibility for things that are, invisible or very minimally visible from an adjoining public way. And yes, we do define what that means, minimally visible. And it excludes Interstate 89. So maybe you're making
Yeah.
a change, you'll see it from 89. Should be
Whatever.
looking at the road.
Yeah.
There's also flexibility for non-contributing structures in the National Register Historic District, so. You have that. Home that's maybe built in the sixties, it's not contributing to that 1860s character. You wanna demolish it and do a total rebuild, a new style, you can do that. These standards will be applied with that greater flexibility.
Sorry, I've got a question.
Mhm.
What's the feasibility that like, if that were to happen and someone's trying to build a new home and it's really right up to the property or like infringing somehow on the historic property, is there any way that we can sort of be aware of that ahead of time or like do anything about that ahead of time? Or is that something, obviously, if they wanna paint it like lime green, you can paint whatever you want
Mhm.
in a new building, whatever, but like, if there's an actual physical element to the new house that would affect. I'm trying to think of an
Mhm.
example, but do you kind of understand what I'm saying? Or is that just not? It's not feasible that that would probably ever happen, so it's not really worth addressing. I'm not sure. Don't have any historic properties that are built right on the edge,
Mhm.
which is helpful. I guess what I'm thinking of when they put up the LLB building next to the bank building and it was like right next to it,
Mhm.
that was obviously like planned. But had that, the bank building been a historic building and the LLB building been right, you know, like whatever it is, 6 feet away,
Mhm.
we maybe would say, well, you block the entire historic. You know, the historic character of the entire house, so.
Right, or the like the British house.
Exactly.
Like if they were to put something that's closer to the street than the
Right.
British house. And it sort of blocks that view, yeah.
Right.
So flexibility for non-contributing structures when reviewing the certificate of appropriateness or permit. The DRB or zoning administrator shall make a final that the proposal is compatible with the National Register Historic District, so that's kind of
Okay.
that out.
Okay,
If you're doing something really super egregious.
right,
There's that backstop that we can make a finding that it's not compatible.
okay, cool, great, thank you.
And. I might pause, cause we did them. Do you wanna do the materials or do you wanna go a little bit more into that setback scenario?
I'm fine, the setback. I'm happy with with that modicum in there, that's fine. I don't need to go too much more into detail about it unless you do, John.
No, I'm
I feel
comfortable.
good with that.
So a big
But yeah,
change,
materials and then eligibility, I think, are the.
yeah, the big change is adapting some of the Secretary of Interior standards. There's the four main treatments: rehab, restoration, preservation, and reconstruction. So reconstruction is gonna be extremely rare. There's no known of a desired reconstruction, for example. Redoing George Washington cabin or something in the village. Rehab is gonna be the most common one, and we include the actual definitions as reference, so, rehab is the act or process of making possible a compatible use for a property through repair, alterations, and addition, while preserving those portions or features that convey its historical, etc. values. These standards acknowledge the need to alter or add to a historic building to meet continuing or new uses while retaining the building's historic character. So primarily, that's what we're doing in the village. And we're also doing it in concert with restoration. That'll be the second most common approach. And we're thinking about restoration more on the material level, so you have that wider vinyl siding. Let's help you bring it into compliance. Maybe it's not a wood siding, but you're doing a composite material that has that reveal. So
Mhm.
restoring the features or bringing them closer into what was original.
Mhm.
And there's that caveat here that we wanna be careful. Restoration should be applied cautiously, as many of Williston's contributing structures have modified features that are historic in their own right. So the orthodontics office, a simpler structure with the Queen Anne porch. We don't want them to demolish that porch. We don't want them to monkey with that porch because it's, even though it's not that original character, we're keeping that in consideration.
So how would this apply to like the old brick church? We've had some discussions about modifying the exterior for the Verizon
Mhm,
tower inside.
mhm,
Possibly replacing some of the wood with some vinyl so that the signals come through,
Mhm.
possibly putting a equipment shed of some sort
Mhm.
either on the lot or attached to the back of the building, or
mhm.
does that fall into these categories? And
Mhm.
I guess kind of like, does it restrict what they can do or what we may want them to do or not do?
We would like it to, right?
Yeah, I
I
think
would-
we would,
yeah.
I mean,
Have a little more oomph on it.
we wanna be able to keep the brick church, so to speak, and not put modern changes to it, even if they're not necessarily visible.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think the current bylaw and the administration of the current bylaw and this proposed bylaw. I think the outcome for the old brick church would be the same. For example, if they were to propose that addition and propose wood to vinyl louvers, it probably would be okay in both circumstances. Our bylaw is clear that it's only applicable to exterior modifications and interior work is not regulated. So for a structure like the old brick church, that addition, we would be looking to see, is it something that is complementary to what's original? So that existing back addition is white clapboard, probably would want it to match that. We probably wouldn't want it to try to look like the original brick.
Mm.
The louvers that they put in with wood, both our current bylaw and this application is gonna, and this bylaw has a little bit more specificity to how that replacement material integrates, so giving us more information about replacement materials, match composition, design, color, texture, reflectivity, and other visual properties. For example, wood siding is often smooth, even though it's wood material, and some of those composites have that really raised wood grain pattern to it. That might not be appropriate here, so we would probably, it probably could be a replacement material. There would be a little more specificity to the review, but I think that would be possible. The caveat and the second component that's separate from the bylaw is our administration of the National Park Service standards isn't the strictest interpretation. We're not Colonial Williamsburg. So even though a property might get an approval, like the Mace House, to make this window change in our terms or make the louver change on our terms, it might not be eligible through the state or federal administration, a la tax credits, other funding sources, so. And that's that balance of we have been trying to treat properties with a little bit more casual administration for that flexibility. The double-edged sword is that then it applies to a town building.
Mhm.
The third caveat and the last caveat on this, it is a town building. So the select board as property owner can apply way more scrutiny to what and how it changes its property. Just as the Lambs could have come in and proposed, we're gonna do a true divided light wood window that's gonna look exactly like the windows did on this whatever gingerbread Queen Anne house. Totally blurring all my styles right there, but they would have that right to do that and the town would have that right as well. And I did many times mention that your idea about a separate standalone addition,
Mhm.
standalone structure that then has conduit into the building
Mhm.
would have a lot less
Yeah,
impact.
like an old carriage house type
Yeah,
something, you know, which would be very
very
appropriate
appropriate.
for the
Mhm.
property at one point, even though it's completely new,
Mhm.
if you will.
Mhm.
But also completely removable
Yeah.
and,
So as long as we're
Yeah.
allowed to still do that.
right,
Mhm.
Now, when we move, let's say move across the road to the town hall. That used to have some type of a steeple up there.
And chimneys.
Right. So with everything we have here, that could be something, it could be considered possibly. And even we've talked about, because there's a slate roof on it now, if I remember right,
Mhm.
and the slate roof is reaching end of life. And there's gonna have to be a decision made at some point for the town hall
Mm.
with a replacement roof.
Mhm.
Are we gonna have to insist on a slate roof? Which I think is what we have to do, but maybe I'm not. There's so many different caveats scattered
Mhm.
throughout here that I'm just.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
are real life cases I can just kind of.
Help wrap it
focus
around,
on.
yeah. So this. For framing,
oh, brother,
in
that
the,
property, I
in,
saw the picture.
in the chapter, we have those standards for treatment of historic property, so those are the higher level of what you should and shouldn't do. Then there's the priority order, repair, replace in kind, do a restoration, replace with a different material, modify a window or door pattern, and the worst would be removing or obscuring original character. And then these evaluation criteria where we jump down to windows, so I use this example. Their replacement was so close, but not quite.
Yeah.
If those muntins were a little bit wider out and on that exterior side, you probably wouldn't be able to tell a difference.
That's
Um,
very nice.
mhm.
So would that be a restoration if somebody proposed to put a steeple back on top of town hall and that's where Verizon potentially mounted their equipment in the future? If it ever got to that point, is that a restoration?
That's a yes and no. Cause Secretary of Interior standard, to be a restoration, you'd have to pick a date and time and restore all elements of the building to that date and time. So if the steeple came off in 1912, to be a restoration to the Secretary of Interior standards, yes, the steeple would get replaced, but like the modern plumbing would come out, like all of those sorts of things, the modern lights and everything. So that's the no, but it sounds like yes, with the town's interpretation of that. It would be between a restoration and a rehabilitation, because technically you'd be restoring an element, but that element helps rehab it into a new use. Is that right?
Right, so that
So,
would, that would be an interesting conversation, say we did have good photo documentation that there was a tall steeple on it. We're restoring that, or reconstructing that,
Mm,
but we wanna keep all the modern amenities on the outside, that modern addition, and we might even be making some other changes to the property at that time. I think that would be a really unique case. And the bylaw does have the caveat of asking for documentation and asking for historic preservation as to
Mhm.
weigh in. Is this sort of mix and matching
Mhm.
of those guidelines acceptable? Cause we are looking for that refinement. For example, you have a 1/1 window, you're doing replacement windows and they originally were 6/6. Go with the 6/6.
Mhm.
Does that same philosophy apply to something, a major reconstruction like a steeple? And I think this
like
framework,
replacing almost, yeah.
gives that room. It does currently say slate shall be replaced with slate. That's a contentious one. I think it's probably best that it's hashed out with the planning commission and the select board. The reason it's kept in this draft in conversations with the planning commission is we have had those 3 recent precedents. You guys have been a little bit more flexible to think about a slate alternative. The DRB ultimately decided on slate. We don't know where that slate appeal application is gonna go yet. It's still hanging out in the ether. They might come back and try to apply for something else. I don't know. So I think that's a conversation that's best had in the public hearing forum. Um,
May I ask another question?
Mhm.
Is it appropriate to add somewhere in this document that to what you said earlier, these are the town's regulations, but if you're trying to get funding for your historic structure from a state or national, that these might not apply? I understand that as someone who used to do this for a living, but I feel like writing that out for the just general homeowner might be really valuable. Cause putting on my homeowner hat, I would be very frustrated if that
mhm.
came to light after I had done, whatever. replacement.
Yes, that's very important. That is included. It's not something that's written into the bylaw because bylaw is very supposed to be.
Yeah, it's very
development regulated.
regulatory, yeah.
But what the village master plan says and what all of our checklists say is, and what I usually do is point people to those
Mhm.
resources. So
Okay.
as the certified local government coordinator. When the orthodontics came in, I said, hey, you really should think about tax credits. I'll put you in touch with Caitlin.
Mhm.
So it's more of that. I don't wanna say economic development side of things, but that
That's,
connecting people to it's parallel to the bylaw administration.
okay,
Helping them get connected to those resources and then letting them know, yeah. If you wanna have the rights to do credits in the future, the more you deviate from what the state and federal. Guidelines would want, the harder it's gonna be for either you or a future property owner.
okay.
Yes, I totally agree.
That makes sense, because town government or any government should be assisting people, not just dictating.
Totally,
It's like you can or can't do that. It's like, well, have you considered this alternative?
Yes.
Mhm.
It's like when I mentioned the pressure treated stuff,
yeah, 100%.
We don't have to tell them any of that stuff, but. If my 2 minutes of talking
Mhm.
makes any difference
Right.
in the longevity of those checks that they're gonna put on. We can help people in
It's
those
a
areas,
community move,
right?
Mhm.
thank you.
For sure, no, I love these questions. Exterior color and prohibited materials, so color is not regulated. These guidelines are intended to assist, so where transition between colors happens, transition between materials is regulated higher up in the document. There are color guidelines to avoid bright things, use more muted or natural tones. And there's a prohibited materials list, so one of the feedbacks from the planning commission was. Things are constantly evolving, and I think there's a standard. That uses that terminology. Evaluation criteria for replacement materials, in recognition that material options are always evolving. And quality can vary from product to product, an approved list is not adopted into this chapter. Materials will be considered on a case-by-case basis using the following criteria. And in context of the cumulative effect on the existing structure. So I think that statement is exactly what we just went through with Tony Lamb.
Yeah.
And then we go into those evaluation criteria. So the things you should be looking for. And then standards for specific components, all on windows, have the grills on the outside, slate's gotta be slate for now. Doors and detailing, roofing, that kind of thing.
Contentious fireboard. Yes,
What?
I
Is
thought,
there a typo?
no, I just read it wrong.
It's riddled with typos because at
Yeah.
some point Microsoft Word gave up on doing spell check for me.
Well,
And it's like,
amazing.
this has to get published,
Amazing.
so we'll fix it. So if you read a typo,
I'll let you know,
landscaping, this got walked back significantly.
okay.
So basically, the setbacks are dictated higher up in this chapter. But we're referring to the standards of chapter 23 and 26. There's some specific requirements where internal landscaping is required. I'm gonna try to get to the brunt of it. So we're still keeping with that guideline that if you're proposing, say you're proposing parking over here, but you're not changing this back 40 and it's not abutting anything, you don't really need to do landscaping in that location. Street trees, we're maintaining that green belt, and you're including a landscape plan that shows how you're replacing things over time due to natural age or failure, or natural failure. Landscaping, so if you have frontage on Williston Road, Old Stage, North Williston or Oak Hill. There needs to be, in addition to streets, trees, some landscaped beds. Plant species selection, combination of perennial and annual. Some examples. Parking lot screening to abutting property, so this is the most important one. Basically, if you're doing a parking lot with more than 4 spaces, there's gotta be a fence to prevent those headlights from shining onto adjacent properties. It's gotta have landscaping. And then there's some places where there could be an exception. The nearest residential occupancy is more than 100 feet away, there's existing topography or landscaping that provides the buffering. Or you're a property of similar or less intensity, so say next to the orthodontist office, you're putting in another commercial use. I think conversely. I thought there had something in here, like if you're putting in residential. You would have to put in the fence.
The residential property owner would have to put in the fence.
Yeah.
Or just live with the headlights then.
Yes. Lower intensity use, I do have it. Lower intensity use proposed adjacent to a higher intensity. Where new dwellings are proposed, an existing or new structure on a property that is adjacent to an existing non-residential use of greater intensity, the DRB may require screening to provide a private backyard area or buffer the residences from the adjoining parking lot. The entire side or rear yard need not be fenced, rather the intent is to ensure some visual buffering for the areas of more frequent use. And then solid waste screening is similar as well. There's thresholds for, the smart residential side ones, if you have four of the regular ones, you don't need to screen it. And if they're placed on the side or rear facade, and then anything more than that, it's gotta be in a structure like one of these. Mechanical equipment, not much has changed there. Did we talk about the solar stuff?
I don't
I
think
don't
so.
don't remember that.
Yeah.
So really threading the needle here, based on the feedback from the State Historic Preservation Office. Solar and on-site energy generation is regulated by the PUC. So if you wanted to put solar panels on your home and they're connected to the grid. We cannot require a permit for that. However, we can require for contributing structures that the mounting systems that are attached or placed on a contributing structure. Don't do any damage.
Cool.
So the mounting system shall not completely obscure or irreparably damage or necessitate full removal of a character defining architectural feature. And provide documentation from a qualified professional that the integrity will not be compromised. Any reputable solar installer is already doing that. Like, for example, there are systems where you can put solar panels on a slate roof. Or integrate solar shingles into a slate roof, so there might be some caveats where. Solar can go on a contributing structure, we just wanna make sure you're not ripping off any decorative freeze board, chimney removal. Is thought about if that's gonna happen.
Cool.
So they're saying we can put solar. On a slate roof. Even in the historic district, if it's visible from the road.
Mhm.
I was reading an article recently on Cause solar has to be removed periodically to replace like asphalt shingles and stuff.
Mhm.
And when you mount your solar, you're putting basically big lag screws down
Mhm.
into the. Trusses, rafters, whatever you have on the structure. After you've put them on, taken them off, put them on, especially when you get into like the third iteration of them. You are starting to affect damage, structural damage to
Mm.
some of that wood framing underneath. And there's some level of study going on. It's like, how far can you go with that before you have compromised the integrity of the roof?
Mhm.
And there's tons of variables, as you can imagine. Slate roof would be more sensitive because of the weight of the slate.
Right.
Mhm.
An old roof would be more sensitive because it's
It's
old.
old.
So,
Mhm.
but some of the newer roofs with just the modern trusses, the cross sections are much smaller. And when you're putting your bolts through from the outside, you're not necessarily right in the center. You could be going down an edge and compromising, so instead of a 2x6 on top, maybe you have a 1x6 effectively on top, you know, it's just,
Mhm.
there's things that are being discovered and discussed. I just bring that up because it was an interesting article I read.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that sounds similar to the conversation that I have had with people where they're like, well, what about solar? And it's like,
Right.
you ever really hold them and then they find out, yeah, the solar guy came out and there's 7 ways to Sunday that we need to fix this place just to keep our existing roof up.
Right.
And we might not be able to structurally accommodate solar without making, some places changes down to the foundation.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Like I've heard no one to talk about the fact that if you put solar on your roof and the snow slides off of the solar, because it slides easy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you have a hyper dog inside and every time a little bit of snow comes off, he goes hyper crazy.
Mhm.
Actually, she goes hyper crazy.
For example.
I might just happen to know a dog like that.
Oh,
I
man.
literally took the metal roofing off of our roof.
Because of that.
Yeah, because I couldn't keep it from sliding and
Mhm.
she was gonna kill us.
Yeah.
You know, with her. It's like somebody drives up behind you, you don't know they're there, and you
Yeah.
play on the horn, and you
Yeah.
just go, you
Yeah.
know? I can't live like this.
Wow.
So anyways,
So the
my mind
standards.
wanders.
Yeah.
Really briefly, because I probably want to wrap up and have a few minutes before planning commission, the standards for new structures and additions, so. Totally. I think this in the old draft was a weak point where we didn't really have some of those form-based drivers. We refer to the telescoping development pattern and specifically reference big house, little house, back house, barn.
Nice.
So you're doing that either attached or detached telescoping pattern. The intent is that you're moving away from Williston Road or away from the adjoining street. For example, that LLB an example, we
Yeah.
would want something to go lengthwise, at least not lengthwise very far along the road. We want you to think about developing backwards, and most parcels lend themselves to that, given the existing lot orientation. So don't match the roof line and the facade line, break it up, ideally orient things away from the road. Massing, simple massing, so where the image on the left has 3 masses and 3 roof ridge lines, and the one on the right has 8. We're thinking about simplifying. Even a structure can be modern in its materials and detailing, but still follow those general principles of simple massing.
Yep.
The intent is things that garages, are placed away and not towards the street. Additions to street facing facades are fairly limited, so. Limited to porches, stoops, landings, or ramps. Enclosed entryways may be permitted where the proposed design is typical for the architectural style and construction date of that structure. So if you're non-contributing structure, you're renovating your style, you wanna do an enclosed porch off the front. That's a lot easier than, say, the Mace House, they wanted to put in an addition on that street facing facade. That's the one we're most protective of. Cottage courts are okay. And then we get into the scale, so windows and door arrangements, roof design, the pitch. material transition, so this is a regulatory thing. And then massing and scale, so thinking about the proportions of siding windows to each other. When we go farther up into. Dimensional standards. So the front yard, there's more flexibility to match what's around you. Parking and loading in the setback, so a property like, the knitting store.
Mhm.
All of that parking's in the front yard setback. It's not super great, but there's no option on that site to
Right.
move it anywhere else, so that property can redevelop quite significantly. But there's more flexibility here for it to keep its parking, cause there's not another option.
Mhm.
And then the setbacks. Minimum 15 feet, maximum 35 feet from Williston Road. And then additional structures can go farther back. We also have, the side yard setbacks. And then table C is going a bit more into the form-based standards, so 36 height is now measured at existing grade, not just finished grade. You have maximum number of stories. Building footprint, so that mass adjacent to the public way is 2,000 square feet. Telescoping structures can be larger than 2,000 square feet. And then the maximum for a detached is 3,500 square feet, so you can't get super big in the village district.
Which is great.
And I think that's where folks have concern about, well, if a new commercial use wants to come into the district, if a multifamily building is proposed, it's like they can do those things. It's gonna be really hard for a national chain to meet these requirements.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna be able to do a large apartment block style building. It's gonna have to be, you might be able to get all of those units on the site, but your design is gonna be far more specific in the village context.
That's great.
And that's pretty much the big overview. I didn't go over demolition or demolition by neglect. None of that has changed. And nothing really has changed about that contributing structure determination process.
That was my last question.
All right, carry on, you're doing well.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, this is great. This is really very well done.
If you see typos or a sentence that you're like, what the heck does she mean? Please do let me know.
Okay.
The timeline on this December 3rd, we're gonna have an informational meeting. It's actually gonna be at the library, because we're doing a Route 2 scoping corridor study. Meeting, it would be good for you guys to be at that as well. I'll let you know about it. We might have a committee meeting on December 3rd if another application comes in. I know there were a couple in the queue for this one and they didn't get back to me. And then potentially on December 17th, but also TBD. The goal is for me to have this document, buttoned up a little bit more for the December 3rd meeting. With the public meeting, and then the planning commission would warn it for a formal hearing sometime after that.
Cool. Nice.
Progress, it's great.
I know. It's wonderful.